12 cars arrived without warning, without apology, dropped at the edge of Isaac Marlo's property like someone had simply run out of room. The woman who ordered it, Charlotte Vane, chief executive of one of the largest automotive distribution groups in the region, never thought twice about the man who signed the receipt. He was a mechanic on a quiet street nobody important had ever driven down. He had grease under his fingernails and a 6-year-old daughter who brought a stuffed bear to work. He was, in her estimation, the last stop before the landfill. 3 months later, his name appeared on every valuation sheet in her boardroom. Not as a supplier, not as a vendor. As the only person who had ever told her the truth about what she threw away. If you have ever been dismissed by someone who never bothered to look closely, keep reading. Isaac Marlo had been up since 5:30. That was not unusual. Since his daughter Mia had started school, his mornings had developed a particular rhythm. Coffee on the workbench. The radio turned low, the rolling door of his garage pulled halfway up, so the cool air could move through the space while the day decided what it wanted to be. He ran a small shop on Eldon Street, a single-level brick building with 2 service bays and a parking strip that could hold maybe 6 cars if nobody was careless with the angles. The sign above the door read, "Marlo's Garage," in white letters that had faded to the color of old cream. He had never repainted it. He told himself it was because he was busy. The truth was that his wife Grace had been the one who picked that particular shade of white. She had said it looked like something that had been there a long time and intended to stay. He had not touched the sign since the morning of the accident, 3 years before. Mia was 6 now, with 2 braids and a habit of narrating everything she observed. She brought her stuffed bear, Biscuit, to the garage every morning. Biscuit had a left ear that had been torn nearly off during a rough patch in the 2nd year of Mia's life, and Isaac had sewn it back with the same black thread he used for upholstery work. Mia considered this the highest possible credential. She had told her kindergarten teacher that her father could fix anything, and she meant it without any poetry intended. She simply believed it the way children believe things that happen to be true. That morning, she was sitting on her usual stool near the tool cabinet, drawing in a notebook with a green crayon, when she looked up at the 1968 Mustang Isaac was finishing under the lift. "Dad," she said, "that car looks like a grandpa taking a nap." Isaac laughed from somewhere beneath the rear axle. "That's about right. Will it wake up? Give me 20 minutes. She considered this, then returned to her drawing. Luke Derry arrived at 7:15, as he always did, with 2 extra cups of coffee from the gas station, 2 blocks over, and a general atmosphere of mild anxiety that had nothing to do with any specific thing and everything to do with his personality. Luke had known Isaac since they were 15, and he was the kind of friend who filled silence with words, the way other people fill silences with music, not because he was nervous, exactly, but because he genuinely could not tell the difference between a comfortable silence and one that needed help. "The Haverford account called again," Luke said, setting a cup on the corner of the workbench. "They want to push the pickup to next Friday. Also, I was looking at the receivables this morning, and I think we need to talk about the Reynolds contract falling through." "I know about the Reynolds contract. It was 40% of our next quarter." "I know, Luke. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying." Isaac rolled out from under the Mustang, sat up on the creeper, and looked at his friend without any particular alarm on his face. "We've had slow quarters before. We do good work. That doesn't change." Luke opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Mia, who was now drawing what appeared to be a car with a face, and then he looked back at Isaac. "You're remarkably calm for a man who just lost his biggest contract. Worrying about it won't fix the carburetor." Luke picked up his coffee. "You know, someday I'd like to be present when something actually rattles you." That happened approximately 90 minutes later. The truck was a large flatbed with hydraulic offloading equipment and a driver who climbed out holding a clipboard the way people hold things they want to hand off as quickly as possible. He was not unfriendly, but he was also not interested in conversation. He confirmed Isaac's name, confirmed the address, and presented a transfer order with the Vane Automotive Group letterhead at the top and the words, "Disposal Order Number, VG1204, printed in the subject line. 12 vehicles. Full title transfer. Released from insurance inventory as written-off units. Receiving party assumes all responsibility for processing and disposal." Isaac read the document twice. He looked up at the driver. Nobody called ahead. They usually don't with disposal lots, the driver said. You want me to offload or not? Isaac looked at the flatbed. He could see the first few shapes under the transport strapping the dull glint of chrome that had once been polished, the crumple of bodywork that had been left alone too long, the particular shade of oxidized paint that old cars develop when they have been sitting in conditions nobody monitored. To the driver, to the insurance adjuster who had processed the paperwork, to everyone in the chain that had moved these 12 vehicles from wherever they had been stored, to the back of this truck on this street, they were the end of something. The final administrative step before they stopped being anyone's problem. Isaac stepped closer to the truck. He was quiet for a long moment. Luke had come out of the garage and was standing behind him, reading the transfer order over his shoulder. 12 cars, Luke said, all written off. Isaac did not answer. He had climbed up on the running board of the flatbed and was looking at the first vehicle, a large American muscle car, under a layer of grime so thick that the color underneath was a matter of speculation. He looked at the roofline. He looked at the curve of the rear quarter panel. He stepped back down. Offload them, he said. Luke started. Offload them, he said again, and went to get his flashlight. What followed, over the next 40 minutes, was the kind of inventory that does not look like much from the outside. Isaac walked the line of 12 vehicles as they were placed in the lot, and he did not rush. He ran his hand along a door seam here, crouched to look at a chassis number there, pressed his thumb into a panel to feel for the give that indicates body filler versus original steel. He did not write anything down. He was listening, in the particular way that people who have spent enough years with their hands inside machines learn to listen, not with their ears, but with something closer to their intuition, a pattern recognition built from 10,000 hours of contact with metal that was made to last, and metal that was made to look like it would last. Mia had followed him out. She stood at a respectful distance, holding Biscuit, watching her father move from car to car with the expression she reserved for things she found important. When Isaac stopped in front of the 11th vehicle, a low-slung coupe painted in a black so old it had started to read as very dark green, Mia walked up beside him. "Dad," she said, "these cars look sad. Like Biscuit before you fixed his ear. Like they're just waiting for somebody." Isaac looked down at her. "Yeah," he said. "That's about right." He signed the delivery receipt. The truck left. And that evening, after Mia had eaten dinner and fallen asleep with Biscuit tucked under one arm, Isaac pulled on his work light, opened his notebook to a fresh page, and started at the beginning. The first vehicle he cataloged properly was the American muscle car, a 1969 Dodge Charger, its engine compartment empty, but its frame intact. The vehicle identification number was clear and unmodified. He ran it against 3 databases. The Charger had rolled off a production line in late September of 1969, sold to a small racing outfit in Tennessee, transferred through 2 private owners over the following decade, and then disappeared from records in the early 1980s. Someone had removed the engine, but the removal was clean, controlled. The mounting bolts had been turned out evenly. No stripped threads, no forced extraction. Someone had taken the engine on purpose and stored it carefully. He went back to the car and looked inside the trunk. Under the spare tire well, wrapped in an oilcloth that had dried to a kind of cardboard stiffness, were 4 components that matched the original engine block specifications. Someone had not stolen the engine. They had hidden it inside the car. The second vehicle he documented in detail was a 1971 Ferrari Dino 246 GT. The paint was almost entirely gone. What remained clung to the lower panels in pale rust-red patches that looked like old maps. But the chassis was straight. Isaac ran a straight edge along the rocker panels. He checked the firewall for heat distortion. He looked at the floor pans for the ripple patterns that appear in metal that has been through an actual impact. There was nothing. The car had not been in a serious accident. The paint had not burned or bubbled from fire. It had simply been stored somewhere with too much moisture and too little attention, and the surface had surrendered slowly over years while the structure beneath it waited. He photographed the identification plate. He cross-referenced the stamped numbers on the engine block against a registry maintained by a collectors organization based in northern Italy. The numbers matched. This was not a replica. This was one of fewer than 300 Dino 246 GT units built for the North American market, and one of a smaller subset fitted with an interior package specified for a particular American distribution agreement. He sat back on his heels and looked at it for a long time. Then he moved to the 11th vehicle, the black coupe that had made him stop during the initial walkthrough. He had saved it because something about its proportions was not right for what it was claiming to be. The body suggested 1 decade. The structural geometry suggested another. He removed the floor mat on the driver's side and felt along the underside of the sill. His fingers found a metal plate that was not a standard identification tag. It was a small stamped rectangle, factory-fitted by someone who knew exactly what they were marking. He photographed it and typed the alphanumeric string into his laptop. The result came back from a private vehicle history archive that specialized in pre-production and prototype documentation. He read the entry 3 times. He read it a 4th time. He looked around the garage at the 11 other cars, at the empty coffee cup on his workbench, at Mia's green crayon drawing of a car with a smiling face that she had left taped to the wall near the radio. He wrote 2 words in his notebook. Do right. Then he closed the notebook, turned off the work light, and went to sit in the chair by the door for a while. Charlotte Vane had been running Vane Automotive Group for 14 months, which was long enough to have stopped surprising people with her decisions, and short enough that certain people in the organization still believed she would eventually defer to them out of habit. She was 29. She wore her hair pulled back in a way that communicated efficiency without appearing to try. She had grown up around the company her father had been the previous chief executive, her grandfather, the founder, and she understood the business in the layered, ambient way that only comes from having sat in the back of rooms where decisions were made long before anyone thought of asking your opinion. She had ordered the disposal of the insurance lot because Jason Holt had put the paperwork in front of her and explained, in his particular way of explaining things that was designed to make disagreement feel uninformed, that carrying the vehicles on the books was creating complexity in advance of the equity offering. The vehicles were written off, the paperwork was clean, the fastest path was disposal. She had signed it in approximately 11 seconds. She had come to Eldon Street 2 days later because Jason had said the receiving facility needed to be verified for compliance purposes, and something in her had been mildly curious about the name Marlo's Garage, 1-star rating from a parts supplier who clearly had a grudge, 4.5 stars from every actual customer, with reviews that mentioned things like, the only honest mechanic I've ever met, and took the time to explain everything. She had filed this away without deciding what to do with it. Then she found herself in the passenger seat of Jason's car heading down Eldon Street, and she told herself it was a compliance check. Isaac Marlo was wiping his hands on a shop rag when they walked in. He was not what she had pictured. She had not pictured much, honestly, but she registered him the way she registered most people, quickly, and with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in a room. He was average height, dark-haired, with the kind of forearms that come from work rather than a gym. His daughter was sitting on a stool near the wall, drawing, with a stuffed bear in her lap. Charlotte looked around the garage. It was clean, relative to what she had expected, organized. She could see the edge of the disposal lot through the side door 12 shapes in various states of external degradation. I want to confirm these are being processed correctly, she said. They're insurance write-offs. They shouldn't be resold. Isaac looked at her without heat. The transfer documents were complete. I understand what I received. Jason stepped forward slightly. He was 54, thick-necked, with the silver hair of a man who had decided at some point that his appearance was a form of authority. We want to be sure there's no misunderstanding about the status of those vehicles. They're designated for scrap, not for retail. I understand that, Isaac said, in the same level voice. The little girl looked up from her drawing. Hi, she said to Charlotte. Do you want to see what I drew? I drew one of the cars outside. Charlotte glanced down. The drawing showed something that was approximately car-shaped, with a large round face on the hood and a frown. There was a small figure standing next to it. The figure had what appeared to be a wrench. That's very nice, Charlotte said, with the careful warmth of someone who is not around children often. She turned back to Isaac. You have a daughter here at the shop. I do. That's practical. She said it without calculation, But something in the word landed a half-step wrong. The implication was not malicious. It was worse than that. It was simply the way a person describes something they have classified without really seeing a small life arranged around limited options. A man on a street like this, doing work like this, with a child on a stool in the corner. Practical. As in, what else would you do? Isaac did not respond. He looked at her for one flat second, and then he looked away. Luke, who had been standing near the back of the garage, tightened his hand around the wrench he was holding. Mia tugged gently on the hem of her father's sleeve. "Dad," she said quietly. The lady looked at the cars outside, the same way the boy at school looked at Biscuit, like he couldn't figure out what they were for. Charlotte and Jason left, 5 minutes later. As their car pulled away from the curb, Mia watched it through the rolling door. "The cars are pretty, Dad," she said. "She just didn't look long enough." Isaac crouched down to her level. "Some people don't, sweetheart." That night, at 11 o'clock, he photographed the metal plate from beneath the 11th vehicle's floor mat under high-resolution lighting and cross-referenced the string a second time with 2 independent archives. What the second search confirmed was this. The vehicle was not a reproduction of anything. It was a prototype. Specifically, it was Unit 11 of a 17-unit pre-production test series commissioned internally by the original Vane Automotive Enterprise in 1973, built in an attempt to qualify for a government fleet contract that had ultimately been awarded to another manufacturer. The project had been quietly discontinued. The prototypes had been dispersed, some destroyed, some sold, some allocated to company executives, most simply losing coherent documentation over the following decades. The stamp on the plate was the original internal production code, and it matched the entry in the archive precisely. He called up a recent auction record for a vehicle from the same prototype series, Unit 7 of 17, documented incompletely, with a damaged chassis and no original paperwork. It had sold at auction in London 14 months ago for $940,000. The unit in his garage was complete. The chassis was straight. The original specification document, still tucked under the floor mat in its laminated sleeve, was intact. By any reasonable estimate, its current market value fell between $1.1 and $1.4 million. He sat with that number for a while. The title was in his name. The transfer documents were signed and filed. By every applicable legal standard, every one of the 12 vehicles in his lot was his property, free and clear, and he could do with them whatever he chose. He thought about Grace. She had said once, very early in their relationship, that she was not afraid of him failing at things. She was afraid of him losing sight of why he did them. He had not understood it fully then. He understood it now. He opened a new document on his laptop. Over the following 2 hours, he assembled a 34-page technical assessment of all 12 vehicles, photographs, condition notes, historical documentation for each, current market valuations drawn from 3 independent reference databases, and a complete copy of the transfer paperwork bearing Vane Automotive Group's signature. He did not write any accusations. He did not include any demands. He printed one copy, sealed it in an envelope, and put it in the top drawer of his desk. He did not send it to anyone. Not yet. 3 days passed. On the 4th morning, a car pulled up to Marlo's garage that did not belong to any of Isaac's regular customers. Jason Holt got out alone. He came in without knocking, looked around the space with the eyes of someone taking inventory, and spoke before Isaac could offer a greeting. "There was an error in the disposal order, Marlo. We need to recover the full lot." Isaac set down the part he was holding. "The transfer documents were valid. I understand that. But there are assets in that group that weren't supposed to be included." Jason's voice had the careful softness of someone who has decided that a certain kind of gentle pressure is more efficient than open aggression. "We'd like to resolve this quietly. For everybody's benefit, I'm not sure I understand what benefit you're describing." Jason looked at him steadily. "You run a small shop. You have a daughter. You want to keep operating in this area without complications. I think you understand what I'm saying." Isaac looked back at him for a long moment. Then he glanced up, very briefly, at the upper corner of the garage, where a small black camera had been mounted since the spring, an insurance requirement, after a tool theft 2 years ago. He looked back at Jason. "You just threatened me. Isaac said, in front of my security camera. I think you understand what I'm saying. Jason's expression shifted not dramatically, but the softness went out of it. He looked up at the camera. He looked back at Isaac. He started toward the door. We'll be in touch through our legal department, he said. That's fine, Isaac said. After the car left, Luke leaned against the workbench and exhaled slowly. I need you to explain to me what is happening. I'm going to send an email, Isaac said, sitting down at his desk. The email to Charlotte Vane was 4 sentences. He said that he believed there were things related to the disposal order that she should be aware of before any legal process was initiated. He said he would prefer to discuss it directly, without intermediaries. He said he was available at her convenience. He left his number. He sent it at 11:47 in the morning. He did not look at his phone for the rest of the day. At 4 in the afternoon, Mia came in from the yard where she had been drawing on the sidewalk with chalk, and she looked at her father's face with the directness that children apply to problems they consider solvable. Dad, she said, are you worried about the sad cars? Not exactly, he said. I'm thinking about doing something the right way. Is there a wrong way? There's an easier way, he said. It's not the same thing. She thought about this. Okay, she said, and went to get a juice box. That weekend he worked, not out of deadline or obligation, but because he wanted to be standing somewhere real when the conversation with Charlotte Vane happened. He wanted to come with evidence, not argument. He and Luke put in 40 hours across the weekend, and they finished 3 of the 12 vehicles. The Charger came back to life in a way that was genuinely startling. The engine components from the trunk, cleaned, reassembled, reinstalled, with the original mounting hardware, started on the second attempt. The sound was not loud in the theatrical way that people who have never worked on old American engines imagine. It was deep and settled, a vibration that moved through the concrete floor and up through the soles of Isaac's boots, and it lasted for approximately 5 seconds before he shut it off, because Mia had run in from the other room with her hands over her ears and an enormous grin on her face. It woke up, she said. It woke up, Isaac said. The Ferrari, he did not mechanically restore. He stabilized it. He cleaned it properly, sealed the exposed metal against further oxidation, and shot it with a primer coat matched to the original color code. It looked, now, like a car waiting to become what it had been, not a finished restoration, but a beginning. The shape underneath was unmistakable. Even Luke, who had never been particularly moved by Italian automotive design, stood in front of it for a long time without saying anything. The prototype he did not touch at all, except to clean it carefully with a dry cloth and position it under the best available light in the far bay. He photographed it again in its current state. He placed the original specification document, still in its laminated sleeve, in the folder with the rest of his documentation. He printed the updated assessment. It ran to 34 pages. He added a 4-page addendum at the back, 3 short paragraphs on a single page, followed by a signature line. His proposal. On Sunday evening, Charlotte Vane replied to his email. 1 line. Monday morning, 9 o'clock, my office. He arrived at 9 exactly, in a clean button-down and the dark trousers he wore to parent conferences. He had not brought Luke. He was carrying a folder. The Vane Automotive Group occupied floors 18 through 22 of a glass building downtown. The 22nd floor was where Charlotte worked. Her assistant showed him to a conference room with a long table and windows that looked out over the city in a way that was clearly intended to establish something. He sat on the side that faced the windows and waited. Charlotte came in 2 minutes later, poured herself water from the carafe on the table, and sat across from him. She was direct. You said there are things I should know. He opened the folder and placed it on the table between them. She looked at the first page, a cover sheet with the 12 vehicles listed by make, model, and year. She turned to the second page and began reading. She read without speaking for a long time. Isaac watched her. He watched the moment, somewhere around page 8, when she turned over a photograph of the prototype in the clean light of his garage, and she stopped. She looked at the image. She looked at the specification document photographed beside it, with the vague production code and the founder's signature in the corner. Where did you find this? She said. Under the floor mat of the 11th vehicle. The laminated sleeve was still attached to the underside of the sill. She looked at the photograph again. This is... She stopped. Unit 11 of 17, Isaac said. The original pre-production test series from 1973. The specification document is original. The chassis is unmodified and structurally sound. The archive documentation is referenced on page 9. Charlotte turned to page 9. She read it. She turned to the valuation section. She read that too. Her expression did not change dramatically. She was too composed for dramatic expressions. But something settled in her face, or perhaps left it. You've had these since last month, she said. I identified the unit in the second week. She looked up from the page. You could have sold them, all of them. The paperwork was valid. Yes. Why didn't you? He thought about Mia and Biscuit. He thought about Grace, and the things she used to say that he had only half understood while she was alive to say them. He thought about the 2 words he had written in his notebook, alone in the garage at 2 a.m. with 12 cars and a flashlight. Because the prototype has your name on it, he said. Literally, your family built it. Whatever I might have done with the other 11 that one belonged in your hands. He paused. And because doing it any other way would have meant becoming something I don't want to be. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. She turned the folder to the last page, the addendum, the 3 paragraphs, the signature line. She began to read. The door to the conference room opened. Jason Holt came in, and his expression when he saw Isaac sitting across from Charlotte was the expression of a man who has walked into a room and found that the situation is considerably further along than he expected. Charlotte, he said, I think we should have legal involved before... Jason. She did not look up from the page. Please wait outside. I'm not sure that's... Please wait outside. She said it the second time, with the kind of quiet that is more final than raised voices. Jason stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked at Isaac with barely contained resentment, the look of a man who has misjudged where the leverage is and has not yet decided what to do about that. Then he stepped back, and the door closed. Charlotte finished reading the addendum. She set it down. You're proposing to return Unit 11 voluntarily, she said, with the condition that it goes into the company's heritage collection. Not to auction, not to a private buyer. You're proposing to retain ownership of the remaining 11 and continue restoration. And you're offering us the first right of purchase on each vehicle at independently verified market value. Correct. And the third item. She tapped the last paragraph. A formal restoration contract for the company's legacy asset inventory. 3 years. Scope of work to be defined clearly. Reasonable terms. He met her eyes. I'm not here to extract anything. I'm here to propose something that works for both of us. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. The morning light from the windows was behind him, and she was looking at him the way she had not looked at him on Eldon Street. Not past him, not through him, but at him. Why did Jason come to your garage? She said. He told me the disposal order had been an error and asked me to return the vehicles. When I said the paperwork was valid, he suggested that my ability to keep operating in the area depended on my willingness to cooperate. In front of your camera. In front of my camera. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm sorry about that. 3 words. Clean and unornamented. Not a performance. An acknowledgement. Isaac nodded once. Item 1, she said. Agreed. Item 2 fair. Item 3, she paused. I want to talk through the scope in more detail, but before that, she closed the folder and set her hands flat on the table. You had every legal right to walk away from all of this with more money than most people see in a decade, and you came here instead. I want to understand why. He was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to give her the true one rather than the presentable one. My daughter asked me if I was going to fix the sad cars, he said. I told her it depended on whether someone asked the right way. He looked at Charlotte steadily. You just did. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something he had not seen her do in either of their 2 prior interactions. She smiled. Not the brief, managed expression she had turned on Mia in the garage. Something real, and slightly surprised, and briefly undefended. She reached for her notepad. The meeting lasted another 2 hours. 3 months later, Marlo's garage was still Marlo's garage. The sign above the door was still the old faded white that Grace had picked, because it looked like something that had been there a long time and intended to stay. The brick was the same brick. The 2 service bays were the same. but the interior had changed in the way things change when the pressure is off and the work can be done properly. A third lift had been installed. A new set of diagnostic equipment occupied the back wall, and 2 additional mechanics worked the morning shifts on a schedule Isaac had built around quality rather than speed. The lot beside the building held 9 vehicles in various stages of restoration. 3 had already left the charger and 2 others, sold at independently verified market prices. The proceeds split according to the terms of the written agreement. The total from those 3 sales was more than Isaac had earned in the previous 2 years combined. He had not spent any of it yet except to pay down the equipment loan and to fix the roof on the back section of the building, which had been leaking since the previous autumn, and which he had been managing with a tarp and a certain amount of willful denial. On the morning of the formal handover of Unit 11, Charlotte arrived at the garage just after 9. She came without Jason Holt. Jason had submitted his resignation the previous month, at Charlotte's request, following an internal review that had been initiated after certain documentation was reviewed by the company's board. She came with the company's general counsel and the director of its heritage division, a quiet man in his 60s named Arthur, who looked at the prototype in the cleaned and lit third bay and stood without speaking for nearly a full minute. "We've been looking for this for 11 years, Arthur said finally. "It was under a floor mat," Isaac said. Arthur looked at him. "A floor mat. People look at the obvious things first," Isaac said. "Sometimes the important things are where nobody thought to check." Charlotte watched this exchange from a few feet away. She was holding a copy of the transfer documentation, the formal return of Unit 11 to the company's legal possession. The vehicle looked, under the lights Isaac had positioned, the way historical photographs of it had suggested it should look when new, low and purposeful, with the particular stillness of something that had been built for a reason. The brass plate on the dashboard, the original upholstery, cracked but present. The specification document in a protective sleeve, back in the hands of the family whose name was on it. She signed her side of the paperwork. Isaac signed his side. Arthur shook Isaac's hand. The general counsel shook Isaac's hand. Charlotte shook Isaac's hand, and when she did, she held it for a moment, longer than a standard professional handshake, and said, quietly, so that only he could hear, "You could have made this a very different story." "I know," he said. "I won't forget that you didn't." He walked them out to the street and watched the transport vehicle pull away with the prototype secured in the bed. Luke came out of the garage behind him and stood with a coffee cup, watching the same thing. "You feel all right about that?" Luke said. "Yeah. No part of you wishes you'd just—" "No." Luke drank his coffee. "Okay." He thought for a moment. "The Dino's nearly ready." "I know. That one's going to be something." "I know." They went back inside. That evening, Isaac and Mia sat on the back step of the garage after dinner, the way they did in warm weather, with Biscuit between them. Mia was carefully resewing one of Biscuit's jacket buttons, using a needle and the black thread she had asked Isaac to teach her to use the previous weekend. She was slow and precise, the way children are when they are genuinely trying to do something right. "The black car is gone," she said. "Went to a good place," Isaac said. Mia nodded very seriously. The way she nodded at things she had already decided were correct. Good. Things belong where they belong. Isaac looked at his daughter at the particular, complete focus she was giving to the button on the bear's jacket. The same focus she had watched him apply to things ever since she was old enough to watch. He thought about Grace. He thought about the morning the trucks had arrived, and the driver had handed him a clipboard, as though the things on that flatbed had already finished being anything. He thought about Charlotte's face when she turned the page and saw the specification document photographed in his garage, in his light, found by his hands. He thought about what it meant to see something clearly. There is a version of this story in which Isaac Marlo said nothing and sold 12 vehicles and took the money and replaced the sign above the door. Nobody would have known. Nobody would have blamed him. The law was on his side in every direction. But the law and the right thing are not always the same shape, and Isaac had spent enough time working on machines to understand that a thing can be technically functional and fundamentally wrong at the same time. He had made a decision, alone in his garage at 2 a.m, with 2 words in a notebook and a photograph of a brass plate and his daughter's stuffed bear watching from the windowsill. He had decided that what kind of person he was mattered more than what kind of settlement he could get. What followed the contract the restorations, the phone calls from Charlotte's office, the morning. When Luke came in with a printed copy of the formalized 3-year agreement and sat down on the floor and laughed with pure relief. None of it was luck. It was the direct result of a man understanding that the value of a thing is not determined by the last person who looked at it. It is determined by the first person who looked at it carefully. Nobody in the industry remembered the exact date the contract was signed. Nobody outside the building had been present when Jason Holt stepped out of a conference room and stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets while the meeting went on without him. But the people who worked at Marlo's garage, and the people who brought their cars there, and the people who eventually heard the story through the particular quiet transmission that honest reputations travel by, they knew that there was a mechanic on Eldon Street who had once been handed something extraordinary by people who didn't know what it was, and who had chosen to do the right thing with it, even when no one was watching. That is not the most efficient way to succeed. It is not the fastest, or the most obvious, or the most commonly advised. But it is the way that, at the end of a long day, you can come home and sit on a back step with your daughter, and watch her fix a stuffed bear's button, and know that what you built is something she can be told about without reservation. Mia finished the button. She held Biscuit up, turned him around once, and nodded. "Good," she said. "Now he won't lose it again." Isaac smiled. He looked at the sky, which was doing the ordinary, irreplaceable thing it does at the end of an ordinary, irreplaceable day. "Yeah," he said. "Now he won't."